At family dinner, my mom called me a deadbeat and said, "Just don't make tonight about you. We already have enough freeloaders." Then my decorated military brother-in-law walked in and saluted me. Let me explain how I got to that moment. I'm Regina Blake, 34, and for the past 8 years, I've been working in classified defense cybersecurity. While my family saw me as the unemployed sister who works from home, I was actually pulling down $140,000 annually, designing security protocols that protect military communication systems. What they didn't know was about to change everything. My family operates on a simple hierarchy. Visible success matters. Invisible success doesn't exist. Dad spent 22 years in the Navy, retired with full honors. Mom was a high school principal for 3 decades. They raised us to believe that real careers come with uniforms, badges, and things you can frame on walls. My brother Billy followed the script perfectly, straight into law enforcement after high school, working his way up to sergeant. Every family gathering, he'd arrive in uniform, or at least with his badge visible. Our parents would beam with pride, asking about his latest cases, his training, his department politics. Billy wasn't particularly intelligent, but he looked the part. Broad shoulders, firm handshake, short answers that sounded authoritative. My sister Jenna took the academic route. Straight A's through high school, debate team captain, full scholarship to Georgetown for international relations. Then she married Adam Torres, a Navy officer who'd been fast-tracked for promotion. Adam was everything our parents wanted in a son-in-law, decorated, disciplined, and destined for command positions. Then there was me. I studied computer science and cybersecurity, but chose a different path. Instead of joining the military or going to a prestigious graduate program, I took internships with defense contractors, small companies doing specialized work, the kind that doesn't get announced in press releases. After graduation, I transitioned into classified defense work. I can't tell you exactly what I do without violating about 17 different NDAs, but I design and audit cybersecurity systems that protect critical military infrastructure. Last year alone, I identified vulnerabilities that could have compromised communications for 2 entire carrier groups. The problem was explaining this to my family. When they asked what I did for work, I had to give vague answers. Consulting, computer security, defense-related research. I couldn't tell them I'd been flown to Norfolk 3 times to brief admirals on network vulnerabilities. I couldn't mention that my security clearance was higher than most colonels. All they saw was someone who worked from a home office and couldn't give straight answers about their job. Over time, their perception hardened into something ugly. I became the family disappointment, the daughter who never found her direction. At family dinners, they'd ask Jenna about her latest consulting project or Billy about his precinct politics. When they got to me, there would be polite silence, followed by someone changing the subject. But here's what really hurt. Despite their dismissal, I kept supporting them. When Billy got arrested for DUI 3 years ago, I wired $15,000 for bail and legal fees before anyone else even knew he'd been arrested. He never thanked me, never paid me back. Within 2 weeks, he was back in uniform like nothing happened. When Jenna had a breakdown during graduate school, I spent 3 nights rewriting her thesis while she recovered. She graduated summa cum laude and gave a speech thanking everyone who helped her. My name wasn't mentioned. When Mom's insurance refused to cover an emergency procedure, leaving her with a $12,000 bill, I paid it immediately. She thanked Dad for figuring out the finances and never asked where the money actually came from. I told myself I was being selfless, that real love doesn't require recognition. But deep down, I was still auditioning for their approval, proving my worth through actions since my words couldn't convey what I actually did for a living. The dynamic got worse after Jenna married Adam. Suddenly, we had a real military man in the family, and I became even more invisible by comparison. Adam had ribbons, commendations, stories they could understand and repeat to their friends. I had classified successes I couldn't discuss and paychecks from companies with innocuous names like Applied Systems Research. Billy started making jokes. "Some of us have real jobs," he'd say when I arrived at family gatherings. "Must be nice to work in your pajamas all day." Mom would laugh that nervous laugh she used when she agreed with something inappropriate. Dad would change the subject but never corrected Billy's assumptions. The jokes escalated. Billy called me the consultant with air quotes. He told people I was great at Googling things and taking a sabbatical from actual employment. At his promotion party last year, someone asked what I did, and Billy answered for me. "She's finding herself. Been at it for about 8 years now." What none of them knew was that I'd been quietly documenting everything, not out of paranoia, but because my security training taught me to maintain detailed records. I had bank statements showing every transfer to Billy, every payment for family emergencies, every expense I'd covered while they dismissed me as a deadbeat. I had performance reviews from supervisors with titles like Deputy Director, Cyber Operations, praising work they'd never understand. I had commendations from 3-star generals for preventing security breaches that would have made international headlines if they'd succeeded. Most importantly, I had Adam's service record. Part of my clearance process involved running security checks on family members, and I'd reviewed Adam's file during routine vetting. I knew exactly what units he'd served with, what operations he'd supported, and what systems he'd relied on. Systems I'd helped design and protect. The breaking point came at Jenna's birthday dinner 3 months ago. It was held at an upscale banquet hall with about 40 guests, including Adam's military colleagues. I almost didn't go. I had a deadline for a critical vulnerability assessment, but something made me show up. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple black dress, carrying a gift I'd chosen carefully, a first edition book on naval strategy that Jenna had mentioned wanting during one of our rare genuine conversations. Mom spotted me first and walked over with that tense smile she wore when she was managing situations. "You came," she said, like my presence was unexpected. "Got the invitation," I replied, holding up the gift. She took it without looking. "I'll put this with the others." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Just don't make tonight about you, okay? We already have enough freeloaders in the family." The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, I'd heard worse from Billy, but because they came from Mom and because she said them so casually, like it was an established fact that I was a burden on the family. Before I could respond, Billy appeared with a beer in his hand and that smirk he wore whenever he was about to perform for an audience. "Look who finally left her apartment," he announced loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Deadbeat made it after all. Several people laughed. Not mean laughter, just the polite chuckling that follows obvious jokes. But it wasn't a joke to me. It was a public declaration of my status in the family hierarchy. I was the punchline, the cautionary tale, the sister who'd never figured out how to be successful. I found a seat at the back of the room and tried to become invisible. The dinner proceeded with all the usual performances. Dad gave a toast about Jenna's accomplishments. Billy regaled a table with stories from his precinct. Jenna graciously accepted congratulations and praise, looking perfect in her navy dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Then Adam arrived, straight from base, wearing his dress uniform. The room actually went quiet for a moment, not because anyone was surprised, but because he looked like everything my family valued: decorated, disciplined, official. He scanned the crowd briefly, then his eyes found me in the back corner. I watched his expression change, not dramatically, but something shifted. He straightened, almost imperceptibly, and walked directly toward me. When he reached my table, he stopped and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Then he saluted. Not a casual gesture, not a joke. A formal, textbook-perfect military salute directed at the family disappointment sitting alone in the back. I heard silverware clatter onto plates. Someone gasped. I think it was my aunt. Dad's fork actually fell onto his plate with a sharp clink. Jenna, who'd been mid-sentence in conversation with her college friends, stopped talking with her mouth slightly open. The salute wasn't casual. It wasn't performative. It was the kind of salute you give to a superior officer, formal and respectful and impossible to misinterpret. I nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Commander," I replied, because that was his rank and because something in my security training kicked in automatically. Adam held the salute for another beat, then dropped his hand. "Wasn't sure I'd see you here," he said quietly. "Wasn't sure either," I admitted. He gestured to the empty chair beside me. "May I?" I nodded again, and he sat down. The room's noise level didn't return to normal. People were still watching, still whispering, still trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. Why would a decorated Navy officer salute someone they'd all been calling a deadbeat? Jenna approached after a few minutes, wearing a strained smile. "Adam, you made it," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, but he didn't stand up or turn away from me. She squeezed his shoulder, shot me a look I couldn't interpret, then returned to her guests. Dad didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening. Neither did Mom. Billy kept staring at Adam like he was solving a puzzle with missing pieces. I left before dessert, walking out quietly while Adam was talking to some of his Navy colleagues, but as I reached the door, I heard him speaking to someone who'd asked about the salute. "She's done more for national security than most officers I've served with," Adam said simply. "Just because you can't talk about it doesn't mean it didn't happen." I drove home in silence, but for the first time in years, it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a truth finally being acknowledged, even if only partially. The next week, the family started asking questions. Jenna texted first. "What exactly do you do for work?" No greeting, no context, just direct and demanding. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone aside. How could I explain that I'd spent the last 4 years working on projects they'd never hear about? That the secure communications protocols Adam's unit relied on had been partly designed by the sister they called a deadbeat? That I'd briefed Pentagon officials on vulnerabilities that could have crippled our military's digital infrastructure? Even if I could violate my security oaths to explain, would they believe me? Or would they assume I was lying to cover for years of professional failure? I didn't respond to Jenna's text. Instead, I went back to work. I had a critical security assessment due for a defense contractor working on next-generation satellite communications, the kind of work that happens in windowless rooms with heavy security protocols, where your colleagues know you only by your clearance level and track record. 3 days later, Mom called and left a voicemail about clearing the air and having a family discussion. I deleted it without listening to the whole message. Billy tried a different approach, showing up at my apartment unannounced. I watched him through the security camera I'd installed, another habit from my professional training, but I didn't answer the door. He waited for 10 minutes, then left. The real shift came 2 weeks later. I was working late on a Friday, reviewing security logs for anomalous access patterns, when I got an email from an unexpected source. Adam. The subject line was blank. The message was brief. "They're starting to ask the right questions. Figured you should know." No signature, no details. But I understood. The family was finally beginning to realize that their assumptions about me might be wrong. Not because of anything I'd said, but because someone they respected had forced them to reconsider. I didn't reply to Adam's email, but I didn't delete it either. That weekend, I made a decision that had been building for months. I was done managing other people's comfort and expectations. On Monday, I called my supervisor and requested a transfer to our West Coast facility. The position came with a $25,000 raise and a chance to work on projects even more sensitive than my current assignments. Within 3 weeks, I was approved for relocation. I put my apartment on the market, arranged for my security clearances to be updated with my new location, and started the process of leaving town. I didn't announce my plans to the family. I just quietly began dismantling the life I'd built around their expectations. The move happened faster than I'd anticipated. My apartment sold within a week to someone who paid asking price without negotiation. My new employer handled most of the relocation logistics, including temporary housing while I found something permanent. By the time I posted about the move on LinkedIn, a simple announcement about new opportunities in advanced security research, I was already living in California. The LinkedIn post generated over 800 congratulatory responses from colleagues, former supervisors, and industry contacts. People I'd worked with over the years. People who knew the quality of my work, even if they couldn't discuss specifics publicly. Billy didn't like the post. Jenna didn't comment. Mom didn't reach out. But 3 of my former supervisors shared it, adding comments about exceptional professionalism and critical contributions to national security. A retired admiral I'd briefed twice commented, "The defense community's gain is the East Coast's loss." Adam liked the post. He also sent a private message. "Congratulations on the new position. Your family is finally starting to understand what they missed." I settled into my new role quickly. The West Coast facility handled different types of threats, more sophisticated attacks from state actors trying to penetrate our most sensitive systems. The work was intellectually challenging and strategically important in ways I couldn't discuss outside the office. My new colleagues treated me as the expert I'd become. When I spoke in meetings, people listened. When I identified vulnerabilities, entire protocols were rewritten. When I recommended security improvements, budgets were adjusted to implement them immediately. For the first time in my career, I wasn't the only woman on my team. My supervisor was a former NSA analyst who'd transitioned to private sector work after 20 years in government service. She understood the unique challenges of doing critical work that couldn't be explained to family or friends. "The secrecy is hardest on relationships," she told me during my first week. "People assume that what they can't see isn't important. It takes a special kind of family to trust that your work matters, even when they can't understand it." I didn't tell her that my family had failed that test completely, but I think she understood anyway. 6 months into my new position, I was promoted to Senior Security Analyst, leading a team of 8 specialists working on countermeasures for advanced persistent threats. The promotion came with another salary increase and recognition within the defense contractor community as someone who could handle the most sensitive assignments. Meanwhile, word filtered back through family channels that the questions in my hometown were intensifying. A cousin who worked in government contracting had done some discreet research into my background. She'd discovered enough to realize that I wasn't the underemployed consultant she'd assumed. She called Jenna with questions. Jenna called Mom. Mom apparently spent several days researching defense contractors online, trying to understand what I might actually do for a living. The breakthrough came when Dad, in a rare moment of curiosity, decided to investigate my employer. He'd assumed it was some small startup, but a basic internet search revealed it was a major defense contractor with billions in government contracts and facilities across multiple states. He called me directly for the first time in over a year. "Regina," he said when I answered, "I think we need to talk." "About what?" "About what you do, what you've been doing. Your mother found some articles about your company online and we realized." He paused. "We realized we might have misunderstood some things." I let the silence stretch. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Could you tell us more about your work?" he asked finally. "I mean, what you're allowed to tell us?" "I design and audit cybersecurity systems for military applications," I said simply. "I've been doing it for 8 years. I have clearances that require extensive background investigations. My salary is in the 6 figures. My work is classified, which is why I couldn't explain it before." Another pause. "How classified?" "The kind where they investigate everyone you've ever lived with." I heard him inhale sharply. "Regina, we didn't know." "No," I agreed. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it cracked something open. Dad admitted they'd made assumptions. He said Mom was embarrassed about calling me a freeloader. He mentioned that Billy had been asking questions about my actual job responsibilities. I didn't forgive anyone immediately. Apologies don't erase years of dismissal and disrespect, but I appreciated the acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. The real vindication came 8 months later when I was invited to speak at a defense industry conference in Washington, D.C. It was a closed-door event, attendance by invitation only, focused on emerging cybersecurity threats to military infrastructure. My presentation covered research I'd conducted into vulnerabilities in satellite communication systems. I couldn't discuss specific details publicly, but the audience, senior military officials, defense executives, and government cybersecurity specialists understood the implications immediately. After my presentation, a 2-star general approached me privately. "Ms. Blake," she said, "your work likely prevented attacks that would have compromised operations in 3 different theaters. I wanted to thank you personally." That conversation was overheard by a logistics coordinator who happened to be the daughter of a family friend back home. Word traveled quickly through the community networks that connect military families. Within 2 weeks, Mom called me. "We saw you speak at that Pentagon conference," she said without preamble. "It wasn't at the Pentagon," I corrected. "It was a private conference." "But there were generals there, and you were presenting to them." "Yes." Long pause. "Regina, we owe you an apology, a real one, for years of not understanding, not asking the right questions, not," she struggled for words, "not seeing who you really are." It was the first genuine apology I'd received from anyone in the family. Not an excuse, not a minimization, just acknowledgement that they'd been wrong and I'd been hurt by their assumptions. I accepted the apology, but I also set boundaries. I told Mom that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but it had to be based on who I actually was, not who they'd assumed I was. No more jokes about unemployment. No more dismissive comments about my career. No more treating me like the family failure when I was actually the family success story they'd never bothered to learn about. She agreed to those terms. More importantly, she communicated them to Dad and Billy. Billy's response was predictably delayed and grudging. He sent a brief text message. "Heard you have an important job. Sorry for the comments." Not exactly eloquent, but it was acknowledgement. Jenna's approach was more thoughtful. She wrote a long letter, actual handwriting, not email, acknowledging that she'd failed as a sister. She admitted that it had been easier to accept the family's narrative about me than to investigate why I was so secretive about my work. "I should have trusted you," she wrote. "I should have known that someone as intelligent and capable as you wouldn't be unemployed for 8 years. I should have asked better questions and defended you when others made assumptions." She also revealed something I hadn't known. Adam had tried to set the record straight at family gatherings multiple times. He'd asked pointed questions about my work, suggested that there might be more to my situation than anyone understood, and generally tried to create space for a different interpretation of my circumstances. "He said you answered questions like someone with serious security clearances," Jenna wrote. "He recognized the signs because he lives with them every day, but we didn't listen to him either." The final piece of family reconciliation came during my annual security clearance renewal. As part of the process, investigators interviewed family members to verify that I hadn't disclosed classified information inappropriately. Dad was contacted by a federal investigator who asked detailed questions about my work, my lifestyle, my financial stability, and my professional reputation. The investigator explained that these questions were routine for people with my level of clearance. After that interview, Dad called me immediately. "They asked if you'd ever seem to have more money than your job should provide," he said. "I told them you've always been financially responsible and generous with family members. Then they asked what job I thought you had." He paused, and I could hear embarrassment in his voice. "I had to admit that I didn't really know what you did for work." The investigator seemed surprised that a family member with high-level clearances hadn't explained their career to their parents. The investigator had gently suggested that Dad might want to research defense contracting and cybersecurity work to better understand my professional field. She said people in your line of work often seem secretive to family members who don't understand the security requirements. That conversation led to Dad spending several weeks researching cybersecurity careers, defense contracting, and military communication systems. He couldn't find details about my specific projects, of course, but he developed a much better understanding of the industry and the importance of the work being done. When we talked again, his tone was completely different. "I understand now why you couldn't tell us much about your job," he said. "And I understand that we should have trusted you enough to know that you wouldn't be unemployed for 8 years. You've been successful this whole time. We just couldn't see it." Today, my relationship with my family is cautiously positive. We talk regularly but carefully. They ask about my work in general terms, and I share what I can without violating security protocols. They've stopped making assumptions about my financial situation or professional competence. Billy has been the slowest to adjust, but he no longer makes jokes about my employment status. At last year's Christmas gathering, he actually introduced me to his girlfriend as my sister, the cybersecurity expert. Jenna and I have rebuilt something that feels like genuine sisterhood. She asks thoughtful questions about my work and my life. She's expressed interest in visiting me in California, and I've told her she's welcome anytime. Mom and Dad have both made efforts to understand my career field better. They can't discuss my specific projects, but they understand the general importance of cybersecurity in modern military operations. More importantly, they've acknowledged that their dismissive treatment was unfair and hurtful. Adam remains the family member I respect most. His salute that night wasn't just recognition of my professional competence. It was a public statement that forced everyone else to reconsider their assumptions. He understood what I did long before anyone else, and he had the courage to call attention to their blindness. The work continues to be intellectually challenging and personally fulfilling. I've been promoted twice since moving to California, and I now lead security assessments for some of the military's most critical communication systems. My salary has increased to $190,000, and I've been offered positions with even higher compensation at other contractors. But more than the money or the titles, I value the respect of colleagues who understand the stakes involved in our work. When I identify a vulnerability that could have compromised military operations, people listen. When I recommend security improvements, they get implemented quickly. When I speak at conferences, people take notes. The family drama feels distant now, like something that happened to a different version of myself. The woman who used to absorb their dismissive comments and desperate for their approval has been replaced by someone who knows her worth and doesn't need external validation. Sometimes I think about that night at Jenna's birthday dinner, when Adam walked across the room and saluted me in front of everyone who'd been calling me a deadbeat. In that moment, everything shifted, not because I needed his recognition, but because it forced everyone else to confront the possibility that they'd been wrong about me. The best kind of vindication isn't revenge. It's simply being seen and valued for who you actually are. That salute wasn't just respect for my work. It was acknowledgement that I'd always deserved better from the people who were supposed to know me best. These days, when people ask what I do for a living, I give them as much information as my security clearances allow. I work in cybersecurity for defense applications. I help protect military communication systems from sophisticated attacks. I can't discuss details, but the work is important and personally fulfilling. And when they ask follow-up questions I can't answer due to classification levels, I just smile and say, "Sorry, that's not something I can talk about." Most people understand immediately. The few who don't probably wouldn't be worth explaining to anyway. My family learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it eventually. Sometimes that's the best outcome you can hope for. Not instant understanding, but eventual recognition that they were wrong to underestimate someone they should have trusted all along.